Welcome to your friendly neighborhood historian, where we discuss just enough history to inform, intrigue, and entertain. I'm Bill Petro. The history of New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve, according to the Gregorian calendar, is the last day of the year, known as Old Year's Day, or St. Sylvester's Day. You may remember hearing that Emperor Constantine was considered the first Christian Roman emperor. St. Sylvester, the Bishop of Rome, is responsible for baptizing Constantine in the 4th century. New Year's and astronomy. New Year's celebrations go back before the Romans to Mesopotamia, about 2,000 years BC. However, those celebrations occurred during the vernal equinox in March and moved during Roman times 2 millennia later to January. This was done at the recommendation of Sosthenes of Alexandria, an ancient astronomer who convinced Julius Caesar to reform the calendar to be a solar one, like that of the Ptolemaic Egyptians, not the previous lunar calendar that Rome had been using since the 7th century BC. Caesar did this by introducing the Julian calendar in 46 BC. Astronomically speaking, Earth is always closest to the Sun in its yearly orbit around this time. This event is called Earth's perihelion. What about American New Year's Eve? In the U.S., the trademark of the New Year's Eve celebration is the dropping of the ball in New York City's Times Square at midnight, which separates December 31st from January 1st of the new year. Times Square became this site in 1904, where the New York Times building was situated. There were chiming bells, fireworks, and falling hot ash. The Times publisher asked Walter Palmer, the chief electrician of the Times, to develop an alternative. Since 1829 in Portsmouth, England, and starting in 1845 in Washington, D.C.'s Foggy Bottom, a maritime time ball was dropped so that sailors at sea could observe it with a telescope and synchronize their chronometers. Palmer designed the same kind of system using electricity from atop the New York Times building at 46th Street and Broadway beginning in 1907 and has continued annually every year except 1942 and 43 when blackouts due to World War II canceled New Year's festivities. Today, the ball system uses Waterford crystals and Philips LED lights and begins its descent at 11:59 p.m. on December 31st. Everyone counts down together to the new year. What's with the tradition of midnight kissing? New Year's Eve is often associated with parties and the tradition of quadrilabial osculation at midnight, which comes from the British tradition of seining, a Scots word for blessing or protection, to be given during the period of Yuletide. It was thought to bring good luck. No mistletoe required. What about drinking bubbles? Popping the cork of champagne or sparkling wine bottles is popular today, but bubbly goes back centuries. We can trace the development of carbonated wine back to the 16th century in England, but it was the French who popularized it. What we've called méthode champenoise since the 19th century involves an added dosage of sugar for a second fermentation. Christopher Merritt reported to the Royal Society of London in 1662 that adding sugar to bottled wine created a fizzy beverage thanks to the yeast in the wine, which consumed the sugar to produce carbon dioxide. The French perfected it in a region known as Champagne, or as we call it, Champagne. Back in 496 AD, they used wine from the Champagne region of France to baptize Clovis, the first king of the Franks. This occurred at the Reims Cathedral, where French kings have been crowned for centuries. Reims, spelled Reims, is one of the principal cities in the Champagne region. It is home to many Maisons de Champagne, of the largest champagne-producing houses. I have visited 2 of those houses myself while visiting there, Taittinger or Taittinger and Veuve Clicquot. By the way, during World War II, Reims was the supreme headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force and the location of the unconditional surrender of the German Wehrmacht on May 7, 1945, VE Day, or Victory in Europe. Here is some wine snobbery you can use. Do you know wine snobs who pronounce French wines with a condescending nose-in-the-air French accent? Here's your chance to one-up them. Moet and Chandon is another premium wine house in the Champagne region. Some New Year's Eve party snobs will pronounce Moet with a knowing Moet, declaring that it's because the trailing T is silent in French. But there's a rule that supersedes it. One always pronounces the trailing T ahead of a vowel. The and between Moet and Chandon in French is A, or Moet et Chandon, so it should be pronounced Moet et Chandon. However, there's a more interesting origin story. French winemaker Claude Moet's name was Dutch, and the Dutch always pronounced the trailing T. But this story is harder to illustrate, and no one is going to listen long enough for your explanation that a Dutch soldier named Leclerc fought alongside Joan of Arc, who was fending off English efforts to prevent Charles VII from being crowned King of France, such that in gratitude the king changed the soldier's name to Moet. But they'll think you're a history expert and a wine connoisseur. Even more so if you mention that Moet et Chandon produces Dom Pérignon. Back to New Year's Eve. Singing Auld Lang Syne. In 1929, the musician Guy Lombardo played this old Scottish song at a hotel in New York, and it became an American tradition via radio broadcast and then television in 1956. You can hear about its origin and meaning in my previous podcast. What about religious services on New Year's Eve? Both Catholic and Protestant churches have what is called watch night services extending past midnight on New Year's Eve. The founder of Methodism, John Wesley, learned it from the Moravian Brethren in the 1730s. Presbyterians, who trace their roots to Scotland, observe the traditional Hogmanay by singing hymns of thanksgiving for God's blessing for the year. There was a unique New Year's celebration amongst the American enslaved population associated with President Lincoln when he announced that he would make effective the Emancipation Proclamation on New Year's Day, 1863, with these words, that all persons held as slaves are, and henceforward shall be free. How do you celebrate New Year's Eve? Thank you for listening. I'm Bill Petro, your friendly neighborhood historian. You can find more details on this topic and others on my website at billpetro.com.